Hello, everyone, to a new episode of Life A Hoot. I have our guest speaker today, Rob Williams, and as y'all can see, we are now on camera. So, hello, everyone. Hey, Rob, how you doing today?
Glad to be with you.
Good, good. So today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we kind of get accustomed to, like whether from the media, it could be from home, it could just be our own biases of how when we hear a story, we always listen to one side, or we're always getting told a particular side to a story, but we never hear what's going on that other side. Right now in the media, we have things going on. We have the Menendez brothers from back in the 90s when they had that court trial. And back then, I remember we always heard one side of that trial of how these kids were after their parents' money and they killed them. Well, now about 30 years later, we're kind of hearing another side that's coming a little bit more in light that we got exposed to before, but as a society, I don't think we really listened. And that's the side of why they killed their parents and listening to their side. So now you kind of got this picture of two sides where now, if the trial gets reopened, they'll the jury can now have a more visual of what transpired to have these kids kill their parents. So again, it's kind of like two sides to a coin, and we can do about that. So Rob, what are kind of your thoughts on things?
One of the things is that Hollywood has a tendency to make a lot of historical dramas and war movies that make it look like a lot of what happened in history was kind of a neat, tidy matter of good versus evil, and really, reality, I think, tends to be a lot more complicated than that. Like when wars happen, there's often neither side is all good and neither side is all evil, and sometimes it's more of a mess. Like a shining example of that, I think, is the American Revolution. Like a lot of what kids are told in history classes about that is that taxation without representation and tyranny was like what it was all about. But according to some sources, actually the taxes were not a major issue in that war because the amount that the citizens of the colonies were paying to the British government in taxes was no more than 10% of what citizens of the UK itself were paying. And so it, there is some historical evidence that a much bigger issue was actually these treaties and deals that the British Empire was signing with France and with some Native American tribes that kind of placed a rigid borderline along the western side of the colonies and prevented invasion and expansion into certain Native American territories. And then in other news, the British Empire did abolish slavery decades before the United States did. So uh, if that Revolutionary War had either not happened or if it had been won by the other side, probably no Civil War, since the slavery issue wouldn't have been around. And
Well, even looking at the Civil War, when you really think about it, the war wasn't all cut and dry of just them trying to free the slaves. It was a little bit more behind that. That just happened to be kind of like, to me, I always say like the icing of the cake of them winning the war and freeing the slaves, but it was a lot more economical reasons why that war happened versus that they think in the South for freeing the slaves and stuff. So, like you said, if the British won, yeah, it could have, it might have prevented some of the slavery, and then that really would have been a big turn of events, even for us here. Like I'm an American black. I don't I know my heritage as far as the DNA, but that would have turned a lot around for a lot of us that are here, or even if our existence. So it's interesting. Even slavery itself, like you're taught, especially in the South. I learned this big in the South. You're always taught white people are bad, and that black and white don't mix. And when you look at some of the slavery and stuff, and you look at the history of the wars, it was a lot of the African countries fighting amongst each other, enslaving each other, and selling them off. So a lot of that happened back in their own countries as well. It's not as cut and dry, like you say, of these Europeans or Spaniards coming and grabbing these, capturing these Africans and selling them off to slavery. I'm like, these were wars within tribal communities and tribal countries that were fighting amongst each other and doing all these horrific stuff and then selling them off. And so, but you don't get that side. And like you said, Hollywood always the split of these happy tribes in the countries, and all of a sudden you see a ship in the horizon, and they capture all these Africans, they selling them off, and it's like, well, it wasn't that cut and dry. I'm like, we kind of did our
There's
own selves dirty in that aspect too. To we contributed, I guess you could say, to that slave trade.
and there's a lot that could be said about the Viking Age. Like, if what you've been told about the Vikings is that they were a bunch of really brutal killers with a horrible human rights record and stuff like this, that what you've heard about them is the truth, but not the entire truth. Really, a lot of what uh, happened there may have actually been revenge for persecution of pagans that happened during a time period when Europe was basically run by the Christian version of the Taliban, shall we say, and the, some of the pagan temples that got destroyed and people killed for refusing to convert and stuff like this. That kind of played a role in a lot of the raids that the Vikings carried out also. Um, and then in other news, one of my favorite movies is The Last Samurai, but really that was another one of these movies that kind of was largely based on actual history, but uh, reality may have been a lot more complicated. There was this civil war that happened briefly in Japan in the late 1800s where the samurai were struggling to preserve the old way of life against the winds of change, basically. Uh, and what the new system that was trying to take over and replace the old clan-based lifestyle was um, in many ways superior. What the samurai really represented was a horribly totalitarian way of life with a rigid caste system, a culture where women were very much second-class citizens and all this, and the samurai had a human rights record that was rather subpar, to put it mildly. But, so there was a lot about the old system that really kind of needed to be changed. But then there is another side to the story also. If you look at what the samurai believed they were fighting for when they were trying to preserve the old way of life, is they were up against this soulless, mechanistic capitalist system where if you look at what the new way of life really represented in all its aspects, it would have been very easy to understand how some people would have been feeling very nostalgic about wanting to return to a time when there used to be other things that mattered besides just your company's bottom line at the end of the next quarter. So there was kind of more than one way of looking at things there. But I think we're now living in kind of a weird point in history because of the internet. The internet is kind of a double-edged sword in some ways. It's like, because of the internet, everybody has access to a lot more sources of news and a lot more opinions and information than they've ever had access to before. But also, because of the internet, it has greatly facilitated everyone kind of staying in their comfort zone and cherry picking their sources of news and commentary, so everybody's only listening to stuff that they already agree with and not listening to anything else. And so we increasingly have like different portions of the public that are very much living in different realities.
Yeah.
And
And they're battling each other of who's right and wrong. And like you said, it's not about who's right or wrong. It's perspective, I love history, and I was watching a documentary on Hitler. And Hitler, in every country you automatically associate with evil, the devil, horrible. Nobody wants to be, if you're associated with anything in that has to do with anything Hitler, Nazi, you're evil. That's how the world sees. But then when you look at some of the reason behind World War II, was him trying to regain the stuff that they lost from the First World War. So in his mind, all he was doing was trying to get Germany back, but he felt Germany that belonged to Germany. So was he wrong in his tactics? Yes. Was he cruel? Yes. But was his thinking wrong? Not necessarily, because think about it. In America, we conquered all this land that we have. We have what, 50 states and some territories, and this did not belong to us. We all came from the Europe, you know, and fought in that Revolutionary War. We got here. This land belonged to the Native Americans. We took their land, conquered it as our own, gave them a couple of lands, called their reservation, and called it a day. And I'm pretty sure when they look at us almost as a Hitler in itself, because we did cruel things too. We, gave them blankets, disease to kill them off. We took their land. We did any and everything to kind of destroy that civilization. And yet here we stand thinking like America is always in the movies. We're always the heroes. We're always the superheroes versus the villains. And I'm like, well, we're the villains in a lot of stories too. And one of my daughter's friends, she's from Japan, and so I asked her, like, when y'all in history class, how do y'all teach history? Because we're taught history a certain way, and when we're taught history, they brush through the slavery part, so they don't really teach us that. They just kind of teach us about the World War One, two, but we're pretty much the top-notch country, so to speak. So she was saying, like, well, in Japan, that's not how they teach it. They teach their history their way. So we're not really the good guys, And she said not to say that they're 100% the good guys either, but they teach history a lot differently than how we teach our history. And so it was nice to get that different viewpoint of how do y'all see us in your country versus how we see you in ours.
Yeah, as another example of different people viewing different parts of reality, because we're all looking at things through our own lens. Like when it comes to politics, I'm really independent minded and not a big fan of either party, but my voter registration is I'm technically a member of the Democratic Party, so it's Democratic campaigns and pollsters who are always contacting me. And, I had one text message I got from somebody campaigning for a Democratic congressional candidate, and they were reminding me that uh, they said democracy itself is at stake in this election because we're up against people who think it's acceptable to use force to overturn an election when they don't like the result. And the person who was saying that to me clearly had in mind the January 6th riot at the Capitol. And the response that I texted back to them was I said, oh, I know what you mean about people trying to use force to overturn an election that they didn't like the result of, like what happened in 2014, for example, when the Obama administration sent the CIA over to Ukraine and helped orchestrate a coup where a democratically elected regime was overthrown and replaced with a fascist junta. The same thing Uncle Sam had been doing all over most of the world for about a century, but this time when they did it in Ukraine in 2014, that was for the purpose of establishing a regime less friendly to Russia and more friendly to NATO. And did anyone ever think for a moment how the United States would be likely to react if Russia did something comparable in Mexico? And so I went on and on like this was my response, and I got no response to that. They just gave up talking to me immediately. But um, so that was something that the Obama administration presided over in 2014. And then 2 years after that, we had the 2016 election, and there were all these allegations all over the place about how some people in Russia were setting up these fake Facebook accounts where they were trying to help bend the odds in favor of the more isolationist candidate instead of the candidate who had been the Secretary of State when that coup happened in Ukraine. And well, geez, how much of a surprise would it have been at that point if anyone in Russia had preferred the isolationist candidate we had over here? And some of this stuff, it just reminds me of that Japanese proverb about how you can see another's ass but not your own. Like
Yeah.
people are doing the same thing that they accuse the other side of routinely, and like
Yeah.
it,
That's
it,
the part that that's the part right there, they do, each party do the same thing, but they only want to point out, like you said, when the other is doing that particular thing. And like you said, they point fingers. I'm my voter registration has one particular party, but I like listening to both issues. I'm just like yourself. I'm not really one way or the other with the political parties. Um, I'm not really favorable from none of them, so we'll just have to see how this November goes. But I get campaign from both, and it's interesting because in one aspect they almost both saying the same thing, and then they both kind of contradicting each other because they'll blame the other for something that they themselves, like you said, done as well, but they only want to point it out if it's the other person. And then in the news, depending on that news media, like if they're pro Trump, they're gonna pick out anything Trump says. If they pro, if they pro Kamala, it's going to be that way. So it just depends. And so when I listen to some of the people, whether they're Trump supporters or Kamala's people, it's funny to listen to. Like I normally would ask them, well, why are you voting for that person? And they can't. I have yet to get a really clear answer, at least from the people in my circle, why they're voting for the person that they're voting for. Most of the people that is voting for Kamala is voting because they hate Trump, or because she's black, she's a woman, so they're voting for her. My friends that are Trump supporters, they're voting for him because they don't like Biden, they didn't like, and so they don't like Kamala, and um, they think Trump's the superhero. So it's really interesting when I listen to both sides, but none of them can tell me really about the policies that they're following or the issues of why they want this particular president in office. So then I'm like, well, why are, so it's kind of like it's just more of a popularity game at this point. It's not really about who's going to make the better president. It's more along who do we like? Who's the fan favorite right now?
Yeah, I've been, the one of the leaders of the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, Desmond Tutu. One time he said that if peace is the thing you want, you don't need to talk to your friends, you need to talk to your enemies. And so, how often is that advice being followed with the lack of diplomacy going on? But I mean, this war involving Ukraine and Russia now is, I've just been horrified by the extent to which history has gotten repeated. Like, um, if you look at a lot of things that happened in Germany during the 1920s, in the immediate aftermath of the First World War, there was so much that happened that just got repeated in the 1990s in Russia in the aftermath of the Cold War. Because what the First World War had in common with the Cold War is, in both cases, we had a major global conflict, the likes of which the world had never seen, and when that conflict ended with a former major world power being handed this crushing, humiliating defeat. As a result of that, the economy in the defeated country was in total ruins. Inflation was off the charts, and the countries that had just, in both cases, the countries that had just won the conflict said to the defeated country, we won, you lost, you don't count anymore, you no longer have a place at the table, your job is to sit down and shut up and let us run the world because our system has been proven superior. So then the corporations from these countries that had just won the conflict went into the defeated power and started ransacking the economy mercilessly.
Well, and
And
that's funny because when you talk about the economy, so I was working with this lady about a week or two ago. She's from Russia, and so she, we were just talking about the war right now, and she was saying how she really wanted Trump in office because of his relationship with Putin, and that she feels she felt that he can probably influence a talk at the table between Ukraine and Russia to kind of stop the war. But she was, no, it was interesting to get a Russian perspective because she was saying that they need this war because it was to preserve Russia's way of living, the economy, and she was frightened that if they lose, they would lose their way of life. So it was interesting because right now all you got is like help Ukraine, Russia's attacking, but to hear from a Russia who's kind of justifying why they were at war, because nobody really paid that no attention, at least for my, because I haven't heard from the Russian side, but for her, she was like, we need to protect our way of life. And she was afraid that if the war keep going, she did say that, they're sitting on bombs. She's like, we're sitting on missiles, we're sitting on bombs that can start another world war. And she was like, somebody needs to get these two countries at the table and just talk. She's like, because Russia needs to protect their way of life. And she's like, I think that our economy is suffering. And she's like, that's one of the reasons this war jumped off, was because of, like you said, sitting them down. Because they got defeated, they kind of got dismissed. Let the other countries run this war. Russia, whatever you have to say don't matter. And
Mhm.
she's kind of saying, well, no, we do. We have a
So
voice.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
here we have Russian voters doing the same thing German voters once did, lining up behind a super patriotic strongman who they feel like might be the Messiah who could lead them out of the mess and restore some sense of order and stability again. And
yeah,
so Putin basically got put in power by the architects of Western foreign policy. Who, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
So that was real interesting. And like I said, getting her perspective on stuff.
But
And,
I also think that there are basically two reasons why it's a good idea to be open-minded and listen to what people are saying when you disagree with them. It's important to understand them because understanding is not necessarily the same thing as agreeing. And because, like, if you're having an argument where you are mistaken about something and somebody else is right about anything and there's anything you've overlooked, then you need to be open-minded and listen to what they're saying in order to have your own mistakes corrected. But then on the other hand, if you're not the one who's making any mistakes, if you're right about everything you're saying, then there's another reason why it's important to listen to people and understand them, because you need to know what is on somebody else's mind and understand what makes them tick in order to communicate with them and change their mind about anything. The ancient Chinese general Sun Tzu, who wrote that famous classic on strategy and tactics, the book called The Art of War, one of the more often quoted lines in that book is where he says, if you know both yourself and the enemy, you'll win every battle. If you know yourself but not the enemy, you'll win one battle for every one that you lose. If you know neither yourself nor the enemy, then you'll succumb in every case. And
and that's true.
the
I
big
mean,
example, yeah.
and I think that's where, as a society, we kind of fail. We talk, but we don't listen. And like I said, even if they're wrong, obviously there's a concern there. And when you're listening, you can address that concern. And I think that would eliminate so much stuff. I've often tell people, like even here in the United States, I don't agree with having a president that's a particular party. I think that as a president, if you're a Republican, Democrat, independent, whatever it is, you're only really representing that one half of the coin of your whole nation. And so I always feel that when they come to the table with these policies, they're not going to listen to the policies of the other party. They're going to quickly dismiss it. And I think as a strong president would look at everything. There's some things Republican I agree with. There's some things Democratic I agree with. So when people ask me my political party, I would say I don't really have one because it depends on the issue and what I think is the best form of action for that particular issue, not who party is the best at that issue. And so that's kind of where I think we kind of fall short on is no matter who becomes president this election year, it's going to be a one-sided country because they're going to try to unravel. Like I know a lot of people hate Trump, and I'm not saying I support him. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying he didn't do all bad. There was some stuff he did that worked. And I think that if a Democratic comes on, they shouldn't just unravel everything. Same thing. There was some stuff that before him, it was what, Obama, and then, or even Biden, maybe, some stuff that they really need to look at. Okay, this actually worked. Let's keep this, but tweak it here and there. What didn't work with that, and instead of just dismissing something altogether. And that's where our country kind of falls short, where we're with so much inner fighting within our country. we become the laughing stock of other countries, and yet we want to stand here saying we're this strong nation, but like you said, we don't see our own, as you say, own assholes. um, but we always want to try to tell somebody else how to live their country. But we, when it comes to the our educational system, when definitely not doing great. Our healthcare system, you know, not everybody can get proper healthcare or can afford healthcare. We got the homelessness in our country is just not great. I mean, there's so much going on in this country that they really need to come up with ways to fix those things within before we go out trying to save and dictate and all that, all these other countries. And I think we don't listen. We're like, oh yeah, we're best, we're good. I'm like, yeah, we're a mess. The United States is a hot mess.
Yeah, this this is going to sound really harsh, but I'm afraid my personal opinion is that there's basically,
Yeah, and they do. And it's like I said, it's sad, but that's kind of the way our country is going. And I think until they fix that, like even maybe do like, I don't know, do like a parliament, maybe establish like how they do in Britain. I don't know, but they need to establish something because even Congress,
yeah,
it,
I keep hearing like a lot of Democrats panicking about the effect of these third party candidates like the Green Party and Cornel West, and so uh, they're in a big panic about those candidates drawing attention away from the Democratic nominee, but they're not campaigning for any ranked choice voting. There's no effort at all being put into ranked choice voting. That's the system where um, they already do this in the state of Maine. It's the system where you say instead of just voting for one candidate on the ballot, you say which candidate is your first choice, which is your second choice, which is your third choice. You rank them all in order like that. So then if your first choice doesn't win, your vote counts as a vote for your second choice, and if that one doesn't win either, it counts as a vote for your third choice. And this is a system that would really give all candidates an equal chance, which apparently the Democratic Party would rather lose to the Republicans in many cases than have a system where they don't have this advantage over the Green Party, apparently. But
yeah.
this is another good example of where it's necessary to understand somebody else in order to have any hope of changing their opinion. The former Labor Secretary of the Clinton administration, Robert Reich, I've seen articles recently that he's written where he was focusing on speaking to the supporters of Jill Stein and Cornel West and all these other alternative third party candidates. And his goal with his opinion pieces was to talk them into voting for the Democratic nominee. And something was missing from these articles that he wrote. He didn't mention any of the issues, didn't address the issues that are on the minds of these voters. He like made it through the whole article without mentioning Russia or Ukraine or Afghanistan or Iraq or Libya or Syria or any other foreign policy issue. So the entire article was just filled with statistical analysis of how much more likely Trump is to win if you vote for this candidate. No mention at all of any issues. So what's going to happen when his intended audience sees those articles? What's going to happen is they are going to feel like they just got reminded that the Democratic Party is paying absolutely no attention to issues that they think are vitally important. So how could that possibly do anything other than help put Trump back in the White House? And so this is those articles that he wrote would have been very different if he had taken the time to find out what was actually on the minds of the audience he was trying to speak to.
And it's funny because I listen to a lot of stuff that Cornel West talk about in the past. I used to always follow him, especially when he was I think teaching at Harvard or something. Um and and like you said, a lot of like the Green parties, independent part, they get drowned out. Like you know, like this year was probably the first year that, well, he has since dropped out. That there, Robert Kennedy Jr. was at one point running, and they get, like you said, they get drowned out by this whole Republican Democrat so much, and you never get to hear that. And it was a little refreshing at a little point because it's like, okay, somebody different, another political party that's maybe can bring something different that can maybe bring things around and together a little bit. But then, you know, they never hold up, and that's the sad part. Like I think on the ballot, I don't remember what year it was, but they actually had three names in the ballot here, which was kind of refreshing because, you know, again, you're either voting, like this year's is either Trump or it's Harris, you know. And if, like you and I, we're like, oh, we don't like, we don't care for either one of them at this point. So now it comes down to, I think in most of America's, who do we not like the most? And it shouldn't be that way. It should be, who's going to bring this country up on top a little bit? Who's going to come up with the ideas? Who's going to? And neither one of them are going to listen to the issues. When I watched the debate, it was more of a laughing stock debate. I listened to both rallies. A lot of times they're not really saying much or giving enough details much. They just kind of brush over it. And then when asked a particular question, they brush over it and then they just tell you what the other party's not doing. And it's kind of like, well, I'm not asking you what the other party's not doing. I'm asking you, what is your thoughts? What is your fix? What is your policy to take care of, you know, our economy, our healthcare system? Are you going to overturn the abortion bans? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? Like, what is it that you're going to do to make living affordable for the middle class? Taxes, this, that. And I never quite, as of yet, heard them actually sit down and really talk on just their plan. And
Mm.
and like you said, you get that one-sided story depending on the media, who they're supporting. Like I had to work with the lady, and all she watches is Fox News, so you're getting that whole channel, just one side stuff, one side stuff. So you're listening to just bashing after bashing after bashing. And I'm like, well, I want to hear what both things have to say. Give me the pros and cons of both candidacy, not just who you're supporting and who you back. You know, it's real interesting. And like you said, we have access to stuff that we didn't have years ago. You know, we grew up where we didn't have computers like this. We didn't have phones. You can look stuff up. You know, we all we had was the news, and back then the news was just that they gave you the news. You know, we had good reporters. Like my favorite reporter was Peter Jennings. Growing up, I used to love Peter Jennings, and you know, you had Walter Cronkite. You know, you had Barbara Walters. You know, you had these people that you don't have today.
Yeah. That book I mentioned, the ancient book by Sun Tzu, The Art of War, I think that really seriously needs to be read by every member of the Democratic Party because that party seems to really specialize in horribly self-destructive strategy. Like, I mean, there was a time earlier this year when, according to like RFK Jr. was trying to run as a primary challenger against Biden within the party, and according to all the polls, he was a stronger candidate against Trump than Biden was at the time. So instead of nominating the stronger candidate in the primary, which is kind of what the primary is supposed to be about, the party decided to protect Biden from any uh, competition in the marketplace of ideas, and they just canceled the primary debates. That caused Kennedy to go off and run as an independent candidate. Then the Democratic Party responded to that by trying to keep him off the ballot in as many states as possible. So then Kennedy responded to that by going and lining up behind Trump. And
Mm.
now the Democrats are back to trying to make sure that he stays on the ballot when they were trying to kick him off before. It's this This is just one of many examples of horribly self-destructive strategy that would have made Sun Tzu say, "I don't even know where to begin with this mess."
Yeah.
Kind of like in the 2016 election when all the polls were indicating that Bernie Sanders would have been a stronger candidate against Trump than Clinton was. So the party said, "Okay, in that case, we've got to nominate Clinton then." And then, yeah, instead of analyzing the reasons why that happened later, a different boogeyman was needed, so they decided to pin the blame on these fake Russian Facebook accounts. And so, okay,
Hmm.
that's who we can pin the blame on now, so we won't have to think about doing anything differently next time. And so then they basically did a lot of it over again this time.
Yeah. Like you said, they're their own worst enemy.
Yeah.
Maybe they need to, like you said, read the Art of War. I mean, because there's a lot of good tactics in there and a lot of intelligence in there. Sometimes, like you said, they lack that thereof, especially this year in this election year. I think there was a lot of mistakes that the Democratic Party made, and then for Biden to drop out of the race, like at the time that he did, and it, let's just say if it's yeah, it's been a messed up election year, and I think they knew Biden. I think he wasn't capable of running for a second term. Nothing to do with his presidency, but from somebody outside looking in, you can already see age got the best of him. I mean, they really need to. I don't know. It's just me, my opinion, but I think they need to put a cap on age um, on presidencies. I mean, somebody in their 80s and 90s and really shouldn't be trying to run a country. It's a stressful job. They should be enjoying their retirement. And I think and it looked like he might have been having some health issues along the way. They really should have planned that better. Like, you know what? No, we're not gonna push him to go. Let's see who our candidates are, who's gonna run. They already knew Trump was coming. He already said he was coming. And if they didn't want Trump in, okay, who can defeat Trump? Who got some good policies? Who got this? I just kind of felt like Kamala was kind of thrown in there a little bit. I mean, I'm pretty sure she wanted that presidency. I just don't. I just feel it. She was just pushed in last minute for me. Then to find that perfect running mate to complement her. So we'll see. It's going to be the next 4 years. No matter how it goes, it is going to be interesting. Um, I used to tell my friends that I only reason I had Twitter, which I think is called X now, was because of Trump. Because I enjoyed opening Twitter up at the time just to see what he had to say for the day. Because he made it the most hilarious 4 years ever. But the one thing I will give him credit for is that he actually got to step into North Korea. I a lot of people kind of criticize North Korea. Again, we don't know what goes on inside North Korea. We only get one side of the story, and for the rest of the world, North Korea is this horrible country with this horrible ruler. But we don't know. That might be a paradise for all we know. But he got a lockdown on his country. Uh, and it was just interesting that he kind of broke through that wall a little bit, you know. And I don't know if it was dictator to dictator or if he actually was that good of a talker to get his foot in the door in North Korea.
There is a Greek proverb that's worth mentioning here also, an old Greek proverb that says, "The believer is happy, but the doubter is wise." Now, a lot of people would hear that, would probably interpret it as being an atheist statement about religion, but I'm not an atheist myself, so I can think of other ways to interpret that. Like when it applies to politics also, like people can often relieve themselves of a large quantity of stress by just paying attention to certain portions of reality and not others, because that makes it easy to believe that you're on the side of good and the other side is all evil and everything. There's no moral discomfort there about pay too much of reality, pay attention to too much of reality. You start to understand more
Well,
than one point of view.
what I thought was funny is like one of the biggest things that's always one sided. and always on the side of good and evil is religion.
Mhm.
When you was mentioning one of your favorite movies, The Last Samurai, I just finished this series called Shogun, and I don't know if you haven't seen it. It's
I
excellent.
saw it also. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and I kind of like the fact that you when they you had this inner turmoil with the different tribes of the Japanese families and how they were battling between the religions. You had your Christianity and your Protestants, and and throughout the years, when you think of wars, it's always been a religious wars. Most wars always been religious wars, and even to this day, we have religious wars. And when I listen to people talk about religion, and for the most part, almost every religion is supposed to be like this peacefulness, this God or gods, um, but at the same time, it's like, but you're fighting, you're persecuting people, you're imprisoning people, you're doing all this stuff, yet you're representing something that's supposed to be good, but at the same time, you're doing something bad. That's why I'm not overly religious. I'm more of I'm a non-denomination person. I like to learn everybody's religion, and kind of handpick what I like from those religions, because I form my own thing. Like right now, one of the big theories out there, because everybody's one-minded of, okay, my religion is the true religion, my God is the real God. Y'all need to follow me. All of y'all are evil. And now this new thing is that with the earth, and that maybe we were here all this time, and that these entities were aliens like Ezekiel, and maybe him actually going up into the sky was going up into a ship. And now the thing that's all over media now on mountains, and how a lot of these mountains look like they were giants, or some of them look like animals, and that maybe at some point in time when the Noah flood or something, that maybe some of these mountains are petrified humanoids and animals. And it's funny because now when you look at a lot of these giant trees and you look at these mountains, it kind of makes sense. Like when you go to like Camelback Mountain, it's like it looked like two camels are sleeping. Maybe there are two camels sleeping. There's a mountain. There's a lot of mountain that's shaped like people, and it's like you can't be one minded and think that it's not possible, because we don't know for sure. Nobody knows religion and the truthfulness behind it. There are some similarities to a lot of religions, and because of those similarities, I kind of do wonder if this entity is out of space entity, or is it an actual God entity, and was Earth just some place that people got dumped and forgotten and they moved on to another planet. So it's interesting to listen to different people ideas to kind of form things, because it start having other things kind of make sense, like, that's a possibility. Don't know if it's true, but that's a possibility. And that's what I love about listening to different sides of stories, is perspective, and the possibilities of things. And 100 years from now, you're gonna have people having the same conversation about us and what we were like and the things we did, and trying to guess and having perspective on it.
Yeah, so some people have this theory that the human species was created by ancient alien scientists who manipulated the DNA of apes they found on Earth and created us. And we do know that 98% of human DNA is identical to chimpanzee. And so I have this theory that this particular theory is strongly supported by human behavior. I mean, if 98% of human DNA is identical to a chimp and 2% other, if that other 2% is some alien GMO, here's why it makes a whole lot of sense to believe in this theory. Just look at human behavior. 2% of the time, we're doing things like creating the internet, creating medical care, leaving footprints on the surface of the moon, and stuff like that. That's 2% of human behavior. The other 98% of the time, it's basically gang warfare, obsession with food and sex and grooming, as we all run around frantically screaming at each other and jockeying for position in a social hierarchy. I rest my case. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So, like I said, that's definitely a possibility. And when they start reading a lot of these ancient texts that they're finding, it supports your theory a whole lot. Like when they were talking, even when they were talking about Noah's Ark, um, one of the theories and the scientists was like, well, if he had two of each animal, and then it was like seven of hooves or five of this animal. It's like, well, how in the world could you fit every single animal other than probably fish and stuff into just some ark? And then one of the scientists was like, well, was it really the physical animal or was it their DNA and cabinets? And I'm like, well, that would make sense that maybe it wasn't physical animals, but the DNA of all these plant, of different species and stuff. I'm like, well, that would make sense. So, I kind of, I'm a science, my brain is science wired. So for me, I like to see, touch, feel, and a lot of that makes sense. Not to, again, not to say that an entity don't exist, but it makes a whole lot of sense that it's otherworldly, like an alien scientist type of theory.
Another way of making, another way of interpreting the Noah's Ark story so it makes perfect sense would be to view it as a symbolic thing, because the thing about that story that really gets my attention is the fact that every single culture all over the world throughout history, every society has had some sort of version of a cataclysmic flood mythology. And so that's such a universal theme. I don't see how there could be that much smoke without some fire somewhere. And just in the last few years, like since 2007, a lot of evidence has been getting discovered that seems to indicate that the thing that caused the last ice age to come to an end abruptly was fragments of a comet striking the ice sheet in Canada and causing it to melt very suddenly. And like when the ice age came to an end suddenly because of that, the water went draining off the continents and raised the sea level so much that the amount of land area that got flooded worldwide was the equivalent of all of Europe and all of China combined. And that would not have been just any land area, but the land area mostly close to the tropics, close to the coast. In other words, the land that would have been most likely to be inhabited by humans at the time.
And think about it, the landmass back millions of years ago was a little more connected than what we are now too. So,
Uh-huh.
if the levels in the water would have came down, it would have flooded a whole lot more land mass than like today, where everything's a little more spread out. So it's definitely, makes a lot of sense. Comet comes, boom, floods everything. If these humongous people existed, between the years, the cold, and so it could have been petrified. I mean, right here in Arizona, we have a petrified forest. Why couldn't some stuff get petrified from back then? Animals, humans that we now associate with mountains and giant trees, and like there's a giant tree that actually has a city in it or inside of it. So I forgot what country it's in, but all over the world there's like these weird mysteries, and the shapes are just, it's too obvious of a shape to not mean something. Like there's no way these shapes just happen to look like humans and animals. I'm like, I can see one or two, but a whole bunch of them, there's got to be, there's something. There's always something to a theory. There's always something to, just like there's always something to a rumor and a lie. There's always a little bit of truth behind it. Same thing. There's always some truth behind some theory out there. Like one theory the scientists had was Mars, and how Mars was inhabited, and that his theory was that Adam and Eve, or the Garden of Eden, was actually Mars, and that when they got kicked off to our planet, to Earth. Again, perspective, whether and then some of the stuff that you see about Mars kind of makes sense because there's some strangeness going on Mars.
There are several scientists who have uncovered a lot of things that look like ruins left behind by some defunct alien civilization on Mars back when Mars had a more Earth-like environment. People like Richard Hoagland, Mike Barra, John Brandenburg, uh, Mark Carlotto, and some of the what they've uncovered is has been discovered with this infrared imaging. Like here on this planet, sometimes the way archaeologists find where are good places to go digging is with aerial photography that uses infrared imaging instead of the visible light spectrum. Because the way it works is uh, when ancient ruins like walls or ruins of buildings are totally buried, if they're not visible because they're totally buried underground, the material that the walls are made of are a different density from the dirt and sand that surrounds them. So the denser material that the walls are made of hangs onto daytime heat longer overnight. So when it gets viewed in this aerial infrared imaging, you can see the heat signature in the ground. And wherever there is no pattern, just a bunch of random lumpy shapes, that's a natural area. But where you see repeating patterns, rectilinear geometry, right angles all over the place, that's an indication that there are ruins built by humans there. And when the archaeologists see this, they know where to go digging. And a lot of ruins of ancient walls and temples and stuff have been found on Earth that wouldn't have been found otherwise that way. And when this same infrared imaging gets used on Mars, the same kind of stuff gets noticed. There are certain areas where they have found rectilinear geometry, repeating patterns, right angles, things that look like buried city blocks. Because of these massive dust storms that Mars has, the places tend to get totally covered up with sand and dust so that it looks totally natural if you just view it in a regular photograph in the visible light spectrum. But look beneath the surface. There are some really interesting things there. And meanwhile, there's this guy in Israel by the name of Rami Bar-Alan who's been posting a lot of stuff on Facebook where he takes these images that were published on NASA websites, pictures taken by the rovers on Mars. And so if anything is in the images that looks artificial, like if you have one of these rovers in the desert on Earth and you're taking a picture looking out across the desert and there's something artificial like a beer can lying on the ground 200 feet away, you're not going to see it in this enormous panoramic photograph. But if you zoom up and magnify that portion of the image so you can see what it would look like if you're just a few feet away from the thing, then that's when these photographs are revealing stuff all over Mars that looks like scraps of machinery scattered all over a junkyard, basically. Gears and boxes and pipes and pieces
It'd
of
be
sheet
very
metal with holes in
interesting if once they're able to start digging and pulling this
it.
stuff out. So that'd be real interesting to see what's down there. Because for all we know, it could still be a civilization somewhere deep down that had to go undercover
Yeah.
because of the atmosphere changing. Because what they did say it was Earth-like at one time.
Mhm.
So that's real interesting. But like I said, it was an interesting theory that, something happened on Mars that caused them to relocate. And who knows, maybe they did relocate here. Maybe, it's a possibility. We never know. There's a lot of strange things that happen. There's just a lot of strange structures. Like when you look at the pyramids, I mean, even now they're still finding, like, they're finding a lot of avenues with things that's lined up. They're finding secret rooms in the pyramid. Like there's things that kind of align up that with the technology that they're supposed to have versus the technology we have today. It's like, how did they build some of these structures that's still standing when we build buildings that can barely stay up 10 years or so? But these are things that's been around for thousands or even millions of years, and they're still standing with what they had back then compared to what we have today. So it brings me back to it, they must have had some type of technology that we don't have today, um, to have to build the stuff they built back then.
The Great Pyramid of Giza, the biggest of the Egyptian pyramids, has its four sides aligned to the cardinal directions of north, south, east, and west, and it's aligned so precisely to those directions that we did not know until the 20th century just how precise it was, because it wasn't until the 20th century that we had surveying and measuring equipment that was capable of measuring something as precise as that. And so
So,
this,
so that had to wonder, how
yeah,
did they know how to build that like that?
and if you draw if you have like a map of the world with a horizontal line drawn across it, place that line so that you have the same amount of land area and continents north of the line is south of the line, so the same amount of land is on both sides. Then you draw another line vertically and place that line so the same amount of land area east of it is equal to what's west of it. The places where those two lines cross is marked precisely by that pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Oh wow! See,
And the height to base perimeter ratio is an exact replica of the polar radius of the Earth in proportion to the equatorial circumference. Uh, the height to base perimeter, multiply the height of the pyramid by 43,200, multiply the base perimeter by 43,200, you get numbers equal to the uh, polar radius of the Earth and the equatorial circumference, and that number, 43,200, is a number that shows up in a lot of ancient mythology all over the world.
so yeah, so like I said, it's definitely something to it where there was definitely a higher intelligence or technological civilization or beings, you know. And like I said, they may have built that for whatever reason, whether it was transportation or whatever. Maybe we were mining for something here. Maybe Earth was a mining company, and then they just left the people behind and moved on. But definitely, this it's something. It's something I would love to. Hopefully, in my lifetime, it gets revealed, like what actually took place back then.
The common belief that the pyramids were built to be tombs is actually not supported by any speck of evidence. There never has been any mummified body found in the pyramids or near them. No grave goods, nothing, no inscriptions in them that say anything about anyone being buried in them. Zero evidence that they were built to be tombs. That's just the theory somebody came up with and it caught on without any particular reason for believing it.
Yep. And like I said, they found more rooms that and passageways that aligned. I think they aligned up with like the moon and stars. Like, so it was definitely either it could have been a like a not not landing pad, but definitely like a marker of some sort, navigational tool. It was definitely there for a particular reason. um, because like you said, everything was a little too precise, and then all the extra stuff that they still trying to figure out in that pyramid that we may never even be able to find out. But it was definitely, like you said, not a tomb. I do think it was like a navigational tool, maybe even a teleportation or device of some sort. I always watch. I'm a sci-fi buff. I like movies like Stargate, and they have like the Stargate, and they come and go. Maybe it was something of that nature, where they were able to come and transport here, do what they got to do, and leave. And maybe it was just stuff that was just left behind. And so we came here like, ooh, these are gods and this, and they was talking about like Noah, and it wasn't Noah. Yeah, it was Noah. Um, and that he was a crossbred, because it goes back to Ezekiel, and again with the alien theory, and that, like you said, and it actually goes in with your theory about them using their DNA and mixing it. And I think like in Ezekiel book they was talking about kind of like the albino, like the description was almost like an albino but not quite. So I don't know. It's a lot of theories, but some of the stuff in these lost texts that they keep finding definitely support the alien theory, and definitely something with DNA and cross DNA. Us, I don't know if it's us with chimps, well, alien with chimpanzees, but it's definitely not a far reach. Again, like you said, you got to open up your mind and listen to these theories. Like right now, if we had a religious buff, they'll tell us everything we're saying is all wrong and that we shouldn't be going down this rabbit hole. But again, it's just perspective and theories and, listening, because you never know. I mean, to me, it all ties in somehow. I think at some point somebody came along and was like, well, we're going to use this to create order. And maybe different people had different ideas of what that order was going to look like. And then they branched out into their different religions. Because, like you said, you notice that they all have some of the same origin stories. Some of them have some of the same, whether it's Jesus, whether it's Yahweh, Allah, or this or that. They all have similar statements in every religion. You can almost every religion, they have similar stuff. It's something. There's a similar backstory. So my theory is they was developed trying to, whatever happened with the alien species, they left. The remaining people had to have chaos. They came up with these stories, but then to avoid fighting, they each branch is like, well, this is what I like out of it, and this is my teaching. So there you got Christianity. That okay, you got Muslims, you got this, you got that, and then from each of those religions, people branched out to their own religion, and then branched out to the millions of religions that we have today. So that's kind of my little theory on things. And again, that's because I like to listen to different religions, and I listen to different perspectives, and I'll be like, that sounds a lot like that religion. That sounds like that, even though y'all all say you're different, y'all all sound the same.
I've always been puzzled by any religion being opposed to talking about ancient aliens and stuff, but it always seemed to me like the theory that this planet is the only one in the universe with any life on it is a theory that is only consistent with atheism. But if you do believe in any kind of intelligent design, then I think it would automatically follow that this planet is not the only inhabited one in the universe, because it's like assuming for a moment that life as we know it is just the result of evolution and a series of accidents caused by molecules randomly bumping into each other. It, it according to that version of reality, the odds against us being here are absolutely incredible. There have been billions of different species that have evolved on this planet, and only one of them has been capable of journeying to another world. And when you look at how we depend on this planet being the perfect distance away from the sun, so it's not too hot, not too cold, and we needed water here, we needed oxygen here, we needed an ozone layer to protect us from the sun's radiation, and there are just billions of different factors that just had to fall into place just the right way for us to be here having this conversation now. So if all of that was an accident, I can see how it would seem unlikely enough, so it would be reasonable to assume that this planet is the only planet in the universe that it happened on. But if there is any kind of intelligent design or divine influence involved, then every all of these conditions that we depend on are intentional, right? So
Mhm.
in that case, there was like 100% chance of us being here having this conversation now if it was intentional. Nothing unlikely about it at all if there's any divine influence at work. So therefore, according to that version of reality, all bets are off as to how many other planets might have life forms like us. But I mean, why would any god or gods that's capable of doing all this right here, why would they
Just
be satisfied to stop with just one planet when there's a whole universe out there to work with?
exactly, exactly. And then I think a lot of times we forget, when we think of life, we're thinking of humanoids like ourselves. Who's to say some of these other planets that we haven't been able to go on, other than landing something on Mars, don't have life? life don't actually have to look. Life is also bacteria, microscopic. I mean, there's so much different. And then not only that, but just because our life has to have need oxygen, needs this, need that, doesn't mean all life does. So for all we know, there's life in our galaxy as well as beyond. So, I always tell people don't assume just because they haven't nobody we don't see a ship from Neptune visiting us that Neptune doesn't have life there that can sustain that atmosphere. I'm like, we don't know. It could, or maybe it's just there to look pretty. Maybe each galaxy have just one planet with life on there. Maybe there's a galaxy that's just like Star Wars and Star Trek that intermix and travel amongst each other. I mean, the possibilities are endless, so it's interesting. But definitely, like you said, if it was an entity, there's no way you would just be satisfied with one planet having life in all this universe and nothing else.
That's what I think when I'm hiking through a desert and I see some plants growing underneath a ledge in the desert where some rocky place where there isn't even any dirt there and it doesn't look like any way for any water to ever reach the place, but there's plants growing there anyway. And I think if there's life growing in a place where it shouldn't be possible, that reminds me of how whatever it was that put life on this planet was apparently not satisfied to leave any place without life. I mean, we got life in the Antarctica, the tropical rainforest, the deserts, the bottom of the ocean, extremophile bacteria that can live in volcanic vents everywhere on this planet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Well, this has been a great podcast. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Rob, for
Thank
joining
you.
us again. And for all of y'all get to actually see us in person because our podcast is now taking on a new platform. So I hope you guys enjoyed. And of course, tune in for the next episode. And, I hope Rob will come back again as we always enjoy having him there. And
I'd
for
love to.
everybody else, just thank you guys for tuning in and listening to us talk about, different perspectives on stuff. And I hope that those of you that listen really listen to somebody, form your own opinions, but gather all the data. Don't just go with what somebody's telling you or just one side. Listen to every side and then make an informed decision from there. Any last words, Rob?
Um, just remember this. There's a one of the stories that gets retold a lot in the world of the martial arts is about this American university professor who goes to a Zen monastery in Japan to talk to the monks there about psychological theories. And the professor from the American university walks in there and he starts talking nonstop about uh, different researchers that he's read about and which theories they come up with. And he never stops talking about everything he's learned. And while he's sitting there running his mouth constantly, one of the Zen monks starts pouring tea and serving tea silently while he's listening to this. And the monk pours tea until the teacup is full, and he keeps pouring, and the cup is overflowing, and it's running all over the table and running all over the floor, and he's still pouring. And the university professor can't stand it any longer. He says, "What are you doing? That cup is so full, it can't hold anymore." And the monk says, "Yeah, just like your mind. It's so full of what you think you know already. There's no room to learn anything new. First, you have to empty your mind like you would empty this cup, and then you can start learning again."
I like that. That's a good one.
Hmm.
Well, I hope everyone enjoy. With that, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Life's a Hoot, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.